circle of ghostly women. Izumi Kyouka. I lay down at dusk, during the time of the twilight hours known as the twilight hour, when human shadows are at their dimmest throughout the day, and it happened between 5 and 6 o'clock, at the beginning of autumn when I was 17. The room was a 4-tatami mat room. It was dimly lit and long, with sliding doors on both sides that allowed for entrance and exit to the other rooms. In other words, the back room could be accessed by opening the sliding doors of one of the rooms from the side, and through them into the entrance hall. One of the rooms had a light window with a paper screen, and outside it was a rustic pond about 2 tatami mats in size, in which there were no goldfish or scarlet carp. The building surrounding the pond had a large roof cut into a rectangle just above it, so rainwater collected there. Moss grows on the gravel that is packed into the rainwater basin, and slugs crawl about. It is damp and damp. When my wife, Saiken, threw away her hair tie here, it transformed into a praying mantis called Ashimaki on the 21st of the month, and the school students cursed it. The paneling of the 3 sides of the pond that surrounded it had been removed, revealing the wall. There are a total of 17 rooms, and although the garden is occupied by a large family, it is an old mansion that is hundreds of years old and has never been maintained, so it is full of mice, dust, and grass. Only 3 or 4 rooms are used by the school's students and their families. Entering the entrance hall is a 15 or 4 tatami room with wooden flooring, furnished with a table and chairs, and set up like a dojo, or a classroom for English, Chinese, and mathematics. What lives deep within the spider's web outside, no one inside knows. Counting from that day, it was exactly 1 week ago, a night when night school was no longer taking place, and the daytime students had already gone home. After dinner was over, I was sitting on the table in my room, by the light of the lamp, reading a book about beautiful boys, novels of good and evil. Generally, writing novels is strictly forbidden at cram schools, so if I happen to be spotted by a teacher, not only will I get a severe scolding, but previously I had a copy of Sanba's Yukio Bureau suddenly confiscated and left lying around for 4 weeks, so I had a serious argument with a rental bookstore owner, who ripped off a large sum of money from me, and I was left speechless. That night, the teacher was out on an errand and out, so I was able to calm down and start reading again. Soon. Onatsu, looking back at the 2 feet of the attendants, raised her hands, as if to show her shyness, said, it was near dusk, and the rain was falling on the field road, and the man she loved was sharing his umbrella, and the rare glimpse of the rain from the side was rare that I was reading without even thinking about what was going on before or after, when I heard a rustling sound on the light-catching paper screen, which was attached to the side of my table while I was quietly reading my novel. My mind was fixed on the trees and thatch, so I was startled and turned around to hear the sound of rustling again. I don't know if it was rain, but it was the beginning of autumn, and judging by the look of the evening sky as I put oil in the lamp, tonight must be a moonlit night like midday. But then I thought to myself, the sound continued unabated. Oh dear, there's a big zelkova tree in the backyard, and its leaves are falling all over the place, so there's no wind, I thought. Thinking this, I was timid at first and didn't open the paper screen, but now I felt a little sick and gloomy, so I clasped my hands together, instinctively looked up at the dark ceiling, and strained my ears. The sound of hail, which could be heard at intervals of a minute or 2, gradually grew more violent, and mixed with the sound of small splashes falling into the pond. For a moment no one could breathe or speak. But after a while, it quieted down a little, and the sound resumed in a lazy, continuous rhythm. The house was completely deserted, but it was not that everyone was unaware of the sound, as everyone was drinking and counting their pulses. From the 2nd floor where he used to live, facing the window and facing him diagonally above and below, a timid-sounding representative named Yamada something who had once come to Tokyo and worked at Hakabunken's shop called out aimlessly in a hushed voice. At the same time, from a room in the back, a trembling voice called out, "What's that? What's that? Just a moment." Unable to stop, he asked, "What's that?" "There's a noise," and, thinking it was a big deal, opened the shoji screen. The pond had been turned over, but no one was there, the paneling hadn't fallen off, and the walls were as torn as usual. The moon had no visible shape, but its light shone brightly on the pure white. And as if nothing had happened, they quickly closed the paper screens again. The sound continued to be heard, and did not stop. At that moment, my wife Saiken, who was apparently asleep in her sloppy nightgown, came out, pale and holding our infant son tightly against her pure white breasts, but she was sitting right under my chair, her eyes as hard as stone. "Hey Yamada, come downstairs." I called out to the man on the second floor, and he came running down the stairs, his voice so loud it sounded like a stone wall was crumbling, and I went to my room alone. None of us said a word. If anything else had happened, all three of them would have been crushed. There was a constant sound of hammering coming from the roof that separated the pond, and it looked as if dozens of bullets were scurrying around the roof in a vortex. It seemed odd, so I stood at the gate, distracted, but the teacher, who had just returned, said, "That's strange. Yes, it's a beautiful moonlit night outside, and you can almost see the insects crawling about. It's awfully cold, isn't it?" Fortunately, the Bishounen Roku was nowhere to be found, and the teacher took his wife, Saiken, and left for another room, and we never heard a sound again. When dawn broke, Yamada grabbed many of the students who were attending school and told them so much. He exaggerated the situation to the point that a new came and took a bath in the pond, hoping to catch him, volunteers for the Navy and Army, people studying Clive's methods and trigonometry, crowded into the area until late at night, bringing iron fans and short swords with them, ordering their own military rations from a nearby caterer, and buying 100-eyed candles. 4 or 5 days passed, and the heroes had fun without any trouble and calmed down. That evening, there was a slight breeze, but I had a fever and felt chilly, so I rolled myself up and, lest I doze off and search for the novel that would take my mind off it, I went to the closet where I hid the rental books and went to sleep. I wasn't sleepy, so I kept blinking my eyes open, but things seemed to appear as illusions, and the ceiling, walls, and table legs gradually disappeared, leaving me feeling lonely. Yamada from the cram school had gone to take a bath, and there was no one in the classroom or on the second floor, and no sound was heard. At his pillow, he heard the sound of footsteps and the hint of something approaching. He turned his pillow over and raised his head, but no one was there. After a while, he heard a soft, drooping sound again, and it reminded him of a body with light shuffling feet, stepping on the tatami mats with only its heels. He raised his head again, but there was nothing there. This time the skylight felt heavier than before, and he looked up with a melancholy feeling. The footsteps repeated 3 times, but this time the pillow did not rise. The air in the room just piled up, and it was as if a weight had been created of its own accord that was trying to hold it down. Unable to bear the pain in my nose and mouth, I struggled with my hands to clear the air and, gasping for breath, sat up. When I stood on my feet, I involuntarily stumbled and crashed into the sliding door on the other side. I tried to go to the next spacious area, panting as I cut lengthwise through the fujiki in the 6 tatami room, but in the blink of an eye I felt like I had traveled about 500 miles, and I was so exhausted I couldn't bear it. There was nothing to hold on to, so I stood in the center of the room, hugging my chest, and took a deep breath in relief. I wondered how far I was from that dreadful place, and turned around fearfully to see a pale woman's legs, obviously wrapped in blurry pink silk, straddling the threshold of my room, less than 5 feet away. I ran forward without thinking, and found myself going round and round on the tatami mats. I frantically ran through one of those spaces, but in the darkness I came across a 3-foot wall with no way out. I thought I might be caught by something terrifying here, so I said to the gods and Buddhas, "I beg of you to hear me," and tried to push the wall down with my fist, but it was wobbly and about to open. I gathered my strength and tried to push it back, but it was in vain, so I pulled it towards me and it quickly opened. I tried to close my eyes and jump in, but it was so bright that I got scared and backed away. Looking around, there was no alcove or anything. There were about 20 women in a circle in a room that seemed to be about 10 tatami mats in size. Perhaps because I was paralyzed, I didn't see any faces. I also didn't think that anyone had a face. All I could see were the breasts exposing the white milk, and the ones facing away from me were the obi knots. Some had their hands on the tatami mat and some were kneeling. In the blink of an eye, I thought that the whole lineup looked at me at once, and I felt a shock in my heart. At that moment, they all said "wow" in unison, laughing "wow" in an incredibly unreliable, indescribable voice that seemed to pull me in a hug through the skylight. It was the usual woman who ran over my body from behind on the tin roof, then her legs turned in front of me and I could see them right in front of my eyes. It felt like I was being pulled inside before I knew it, so I suddenly fell forward. My body, which was hot, tumbled and fell back onto the bed as if I was being thrown into the air. When I came to my senses, I thought I was experiencing an earthquake, but then cold sweat started flowing like a waterfall and eventually it stuck to my pillow like cotton, and I came to my senses. From inside the room I could hear the frequent cries of my baby. This continued to bother me, and no matter how much time passed, it didn't get better, so I left the room without saying anything. I immediately recovered, as if I had forgotten about it. Even in the local area, this area was an extremely rough samurai town during the feudal period, and I later heard that no elderly woman had ever been brought there, let alone sent to work as a maid or concubine, and never returned alive. There are many stories of mischief in particular about the mansion in question, but I won't mention them here as they seem more like a formality. Afterwards, the teacher moved to another place immediately because the baby's crying at night was unbearable. The residence has changed several times, and it seems the current residents have been living there for a long time. February 1900.